Throughout the week when I introduce myself to a group of people, it's usually by saying, "Hi, my name is Kevin, and I am an alcoholic." Yeah.
Hi, everyone. I am Tommy Townsend. I am also one of those rectors of a small, thriving parish on St. Simon's. I do hail from Brunswick. That's where I started my recovery journey in a halfway house, which we'll talk about a little bit more down the road. But I do live on St. Simon's now with my wife, Laura, and have been serving that parish now for, can you believe it, June, almost 6.5 years, which is hard to believe. Like most priests, my island is small, and I go in and out of the Winn-Dixie to do my shopping, and pretty much anywhere I go these days, I'm known as Father Tommy, but there are those I pass in the aisle that give me a nod or a wink or a smile along the way, and they know me quite differently. But they remember the day I wandered into the rooms, and most often we don't speak to each other. We might occasionally, depending on who's around, but they also know me in the way that I introduce myself. My name is Tommy. I'm an alcoholic. I'm Tommy. I'm an alcoholic. A little over 13 years ago, those are words that I would have never in a million years envisioned myself saying or admitting to. Even though deep down inside I knew something wasn't quite right, I was fighting this disease in every way, and I didn't even know what I was doing. I could take an hour to unpack. There's lots of people in recovery in this room, I know that. So I'm going to just give you some high points. But Kevin and I, our recovery come at a kind of a little bit different directions. I mean, I was born into a rich family in South Carolina, rich in heritage. I mean, we were old Southern families, steeped in Anglicanism in the Episcopal Church. I mean, I can remember sitting literally on the second pew every Sunday, dressed with my nice little tie, where my mother would make sure I behaved myself and was exposed to God from an early age. I was the firstborn son of a very successful businessman. I had a brother and a sister. There was no abuse in my family. It was a lovely place to grow up in Greenville, South Carolina back in the day. And the people that would have looked at the Townsend kids, they would have said, what a perfect family, right? Some might even say I was raised with a silver spoon in my mouth, and perhaps they would be right. There were a lot of things I did in my youth that I cherish. I learned to fly when I was 15, soloed on my 16th birthday, swam on the swim team. I had a deep sense of service to my country because I came from a family of a string of military people from all the way back to my grandfather at World War II and who served at Pearl Harbor. So off to the Citadel I went, eyes wide open, ready young man to serve his country. But God had messed with me a little bit, so I went with two plans in my hand. I was either going to go to seminary upon graduation and be a priest, but I really wanted to go fly F-14s off of the decks of carriers, much like Tom Cruise in Top Gun, both of which dreams were removed from me my senior year. Failed my flight physical my senior year, and believe it or not, there was a glutton of priests back in the day in 1985. And so my bishop said, why don't you go take a walkabout for a while in the world and come back? Little did he know that would be a 26-year walkabout. So I went and served in my country in the Army and then Germany, and came back home and entered, unbeknownst to me, not even searched for, into the medical device arena, where I spent the next 24 years, or 26 years actually, just about, in the operating room, selling to doctors, whining and dining and traveling the world in some of the finest restaurants and resort locations where we would entice them to use our products, which is so much a part of that business. Through it all, alcohol was there. It was never something that I shied away from. It was something that was always around us and involved in my business, and it had always been in our family. Looking back now, I see for what it was, but then it was just like breathing, quite honestly, to me and my family. It was around all the time. Over those years, my disease slowly took hold of me. And this is one of the things we'll talk about, I hope, today, is that how cunning and baffling and powerful this disease is. I thought I was just fine. Although I had now a string of relationships in my wake, I had 3 small children to raise. Somehow, those of you who are in the rooms, I stumbled upstairs with each promotion in spite of myself. until the day in 2009 when literally I got to that, what my sponsor loves to remind me of, that point of desperation. Right? I mean, I was absolutely lost. I came to the realization that I could not live with alcohol and I could not live without it. So my choice, not knowing where to go for help, was to go to the bank and withdraw every bit of money I could get out of the bank so nobody could find me, with the intent of drinking myself to death, which I tried. For 3 days, I disappeared off the radar. I have very little recollection of it until the day I woke up on the floor and called my mom and asked for help. My sister was dispatched. I was scooped off the floor and whisked away to Willingway Hospital, where I began my recovery. It was the end of October in 2009. I remember sitting thinking to myself, how in God's name did Thomas Pinckney Townsend III from South Carolina end up in a rehab bed? Didn't make sense to me. Didn't calculate. Wasn't supposed to happen that way. But there I was. Started feeling good. Wrote a note to my mom because while I was in rehab, I got served divorce papers and fired from my greatest job that I'd ever dreamed of achieving as a vice president in this company. So I had nowhere to go. I had a bag of clothes and I had two choices, basically, was beg for help from my mother or walk out the door with a bag of clothes. Nobody wanted me, I thought. So I wrote this passionate letter. He's heard this story so many times, he's grinning, to my mother. As a 46-year-old business executive does when the world falls apart, you write your mother and ask for help, which I did very passionately. A few days later, I got her response. I love you with all my heart, son, but you are not welcome in my home. What? I was crushed. I had nowhere to go, and my own mother seemingly had slammed the door in my face. All this I hope we talk about later. I know, he's testing me. It's very hard to tell because it's something that is so real to me that I can remember it like it was yesterday. Anyway, the only thing she was willing to do was send me to a halfway house to pay the fee. The rest was on me. That's how I landed in Brunswick. I reside in Brunswick. Found myself to a recovery home, lived in that recovery house for 9 months, got sober, had a job, got an old rusted out plumber's van that I drove around Glenn County, which was the ugliest van in town. Met my wife because I sold her a weed eater at Lowe's. And my absolute worst in life, in my mind, I thought. But in that, I found a sponsor and a group of people that when I said, I'm Tommy, I'm an alcoholic, instead of feeling shame and guilt and embarrassment, speaking that out into the light of others just like me, I found recovery. Then from there, my call to ministry came back in a powerful way. I was introduced to this guy by a very wise bishop who saw two people who were very much alike that needed each other. And I have been blessed to be called to serve in a community that is rich in recovery. And I'm just grateful to be here. And I hope that whatever Kevin and I say will inspire some of you to ask some of those hard questions, because I don't think anything Kevin and I haven't been asked before.
So my story is a little different than Tommy's. Tommy got sober first and got ordained second. I came out the other way around. We have somebody who in the room here today who's about to get ordained in the Episcopal Church, maybe sometime this month, and I suggested that May 25th is a wonderful day to get ordained because on May the 25th, I will celebrate my 29th anniversary of ordination. So I had been doing this for nearly 30 years. In the introduction, which Carol let me write myself, I talked about being drawn. It's a church joke. Do we have any Presbyterians in the room? So I was born a Presbyterian, but it just wasn't meant to be. That only works for Presbyterians. I came into the Episcopal Church for lots of reasons. we started looking for another church for lots of reasons. I was nearly born on the organ bench. My mother's a church organist. She retired last week after 60 years as a church organist. I never had any choice about going to church on Sunday. We just did it. And lots of times I was sitting next to her on the bench turning pages for her while she played, and Daddy sang in the choir. So church has always been an important part of my life. But when I was 11, we started looking at different churches, places to worship, and found our way into the Episcopal Church. And it was the liturgy, the worship, that attracted me. I mean, I was just transfixed by it. They had Eucharist, communion every Sunday instead of once every 3 months. They clearly knew what they were doing when they did it, which was different than my experience on Sunday morning. And there was sort of the richness of the symbolism, like everything meant something. And they had a book, right? Like the whole service is in a book, and you know what's coming next. And just the way my brain is wired, like that clicked for me. To the point that I told my parents, I really don't care where y'all go. Will you bring me here? And after that, they never had to get me up to make me go to church on Sunday. Went to seminary. I was talking with somebody whose kids graduated from the same school that I did. He said, he joked and said, well, one of them was on the 5-year plan. I was on the 7-year plan. Took me 7 years to get through college because I had to figure out what I was doing and what I wanted to do. But then once I graduated in 91, I went straight to seminary. Got ordained in 94. I love the work that I do as a priest. It's very fulfilling in all sorts of ways. I'm telling you all of that because as sort of religious as my background was, as steeped in the traditions of the church, as strong as I would tell you my faith in God and Jesus was, that did me not a bit of good when it came to being a drunk. It did not help me. There is a joke in the Episcopal Church that the real difference between Baptists and Episcopalians is that Episcopalians will speak to each other in the liquor store, right? Wherever 3 or 4 Episcopalians are gathered together, there's always a fifth. There is it's okay to drink and be an Episcopalian. And so there wasn't that sort of that stigma of drinking at church, and there certainly is among the clergy. Let me tell you about that. Ooh. But most clergy don't drink like I did. I thought the way I drank was perfectly fine. I just didn't understand why everybody else seemed to be on my case about it. Like I mostly was at work when I was supposed to be. Always on Sunday. There was only one time on a Sunday morning, not that I was hungover, but that when I got up in the pulpit, I was still drunk from the night. That's a bad feeling. Let me tell you, a bad feeling. I actually got sober in church, believe it or not, in the middle of a sermon, not my own. I was in trouble with the bishop and with the vestry for, not showing up to things that I was supposed to be. People didn't know where I was. Things were falling through the cracks. And I'd gotten called up to we want to meet with you after the services this evening, and you give us an explanation. They called me on Friday to ask me about that. So I spent the whole rest of the weekend trying to figure out how I was going to answer that question to keep myself out of trouble. It's one thing alcoholics are really good at, is avoiding impending consequences of our own actions and decisions. Right? So that was my weekend, and I thought I had the answer that would satisfy and perhaps charm them and make them feel sorry for me. Right? That rings a bell, doesn't it? And so I'm sitting in church, and we had 3 services. This is church in Louisiana, in Baton Rouge, big church. Had 3 services every Sunday. And our wonderful, wise old deacon was already scheduled to preach for that day. And the gospel reading for that Sunday was when Jesus asked his disciples, "Who do people say that I am?" Y'all familiar with that story? And then he says, "But who do you say that I am?" And Peter kind of says something. So I heard that sermon 3 times. I don't know what most of it was about, but I know how it ended. Because the 3rd time that Sunday, Deacon Charlie, he said, once once we have answered that question for him, who do you say that I am? We have a question to ask ourselves, which is, Lord, who do you say that I am? And am I the person that you want me to be? And our tradition has a lot to say about what can happen between a Friday and a Sunday morning. And by the time I'd heard that 3 times, I knew the answer to that question, that I was an alcoholic and I was not who God wanted me to be. It was the most terrifying, horrific experience that I'd ever had up until that point. And I was ashamed and embarrassed and didn't know what to do. The only thing I knew was that I had to go tell my wife before I told anybody else that I owed her that. I didn't know how she was going to react. Well, she was the rock that I've leaned on my whole married life. And we are still married. My kids still talk to me. Christine does not have any problem at all with alcohol. Never has. She hardly ever drinks. And when she does, she'll drink half a glass of wine and leave the rest of it sitting there, because if she finishes it, she won't feel good. And if you're not an alcoholic, you don't know why that's funny. But if you are, you know that that is insanity. What do you mean you will feel worse? I still can't wrap my brain around that. This was 10 years ago. 10 years I've been sober, and I still freaking think like an alcoholic. Because I am one. She will tell people, though, she will talk about the time when we got sober. Because what we figured out early on was that while I was the one with the drinking problem, she and I both thought and acted like alcoholics long before I started drinking like that. Right? And that, for the last 10 years, has been the biggest struggle for me, is not to not drink like an alcoholic, but not to think like one. And we have a saying in the program about it's that stinking thinking that gets you in trouble. And that is still true for me. So Tommy had the experience of his mom slamming the door in his face, but finding welcome in the church. I had the exact opposite. The church turned its back on me. All of my clergy colleagues in that diocese, with the exception of 2, who were perfectly happy to drink with me at clergy conference. When I came out and had to tell people that I was an alcoholic, they ran away from me like what I had was contagious, except for 2 of them. You don't ever, when you fall flat on your face publicly, you never forget the people who were standing next to you to help you get up off the ground. There's never been anything anonymous about my recovery. I had to write a letter to the whole congregation, 1,000 people. I had to write a letter to the parents of the 200 students at the day school at my church. And that's humiliating, right? Nobody wants their dirty laundry aired out in public. But when you do it, when you tell 1,500 people, hey, I am a drunk and I'm going to try to get sober, you can't take it back, right? Oh, I was just kidding. No, I've rethought this. I wasn't happy about it at the time, but I'm grateful that it was the way that it was. Because what that means is I have never, first of all, I didn't have the option or the opportunity to be anonymous or hide the fact that I was in recovery. And now I get to be open about it. Because one of the things that happened that first night, that Sunday night after I came home, I told Christine after the service, I went back and talked to the vestry about it. Oh God, they were so supportive. They hugged me. We all cried. And then 2 days later, the shit hit the fan, right? And it just went downhill from there. Sorry. I forgot I'm in a church and not in a meeting.
It
I
happens
talk a
a
little
lot.
differently in meetings than I do in church. I apologize. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh boy, I just lost train of thought on that one. But what I found in AA was support and welcome. Oh, here's what I was going to say. That night when I was home, every person that I'd ever known that I had a relationship with who had in some way or another let it slip that they were in recovery, every question that anybody had ever asked me about drinking, like, how many is that? Are you okay? All that stuff that I brushed off and ignored, every bit of it just came rushing back. I reached out to every friend I knew who was in recovery, and I said, what do I do? And one of them, his name is Adam. He now lives in the Virgin Islands. Adam is 6'5". He is a retired Army Ranger. He's very hard to argue with. He said, Kevin, you're smart and well-educated. That's not going to do you any good. You need to get to a meeting. You keep your mouth shut, and you do what they tell you. And it was like, yes, I will go to a meeting. I will keep my mouth shut. You don't argue, right? Like, this is what I do. So I went to a meeting the next day, and you know what they told me? Anybody's ever been in a meeting? What do you tell a newcomer? Keep coming back. They told me to come back the next day. So I did, and two things happened. The first was they remembered me, which I did not expect. And the second thing was they were happy to see me. And they were the only people I knew at that moment who were happy to see me. And what I found in those rooms was support, encouragement, help, but also accountability. People will tell you that, we don't judge people in recovery. Oh, yes, we do. We judge your behavior and your actions. We don't judge you. But we will flat out call you on what you say and what you do if we know it's alcoholic thinking or alcoholic behavior. That's what you get in 12-step programs that you don't get in other places. What we tend to find in other places is shame, blame, accusation, and exclusion. I've had members of my own church, when I've talked about opening the doors to people in recovery, say to me, I don't want those people in my church. And I'm like, you're talking to one of those people, and it's not your church. But you want to know why people don't come to the church when they need help? It's because that's what they run into. Sometimes from clergy, but more often from the people sitting around them in the pews. That's why they tend not to come to us for help, because they're afraid that they're going to get turned away. They're afraid they're going to get told either explicitly or implicitly, we don't want your kind of people in our church.
And that's so true. And what I find amazing to me, as you were talking, the freedom that bishop allowed Kevin and I. How many years ago did we figure that was out? How many years ago was that?
8.
8 years ago, I wasn't even ordained yet, and I was terrified because I still had to go before these committees that were going to decide whether I was worthy of being a priest or not. And we stood before the whole convention. Some of you may have been there, and Kevin and I, that introduction we started with today, they basically came out as recovering alcoholics in front of the whole diocese. And what's amazing to me is talking to the stigmatism and those fears that people come. Both of us are those priests, right? I mean, everybody in St. Simon's, I promise you, knows me as, oh, that's the recovering priest. That's the dude that used to load my truck over at Lowe's and lived in the halfway house, and that's his church. And even in light of that, the people that come to me terrified because I got a collar around my neck to talk to me about their struggles with alcohol. I mean, I just on the way down to pick up Kevin this morning, I had my phone was ringing. It was a parishioner who's worshiped with me since I've been there. Do I have your permission to tell someone that you're an alcoholic? I said, yes. Now that goes against a lot of the things that we learn in the 12-step program, but I chose that for me. And but that shame is so prevalent still in the world today, and it shouldn't be.
So our goal is to, talk to y'all about, we said, what do we call it? Straight talk about addiction and recovery, what faith leaders need to know.
Yeah.
So we're going to try to share some of that with y'all. I really We've got great questions up here. I'll hope you ask more of them, because otherwise you just have to
Listen to us.
listen to
ramble.
us. About what you can do and what you can't do. And in fact, two of the questions: what's the best way to approach your congregation with what we're doing without them feeling we're accusing them? Well, don't accuse them, first of all. We have 5 12-step meetings at our church every week.
Yeah.
And we still have folks when like the lights are left on or the AC's running, It's those AA people. I'm like, well, you know what? It really is not. It's
Blame it on the scouts.
he knows it really is the
That's right.
scouts.
That's right.
But our first thought is it's those people. It's those people that we let in our building. And so, I mean, that's part of it. I'm going to tell you something else, though. A lot of the conversations that I've had with clergy about how can we help is my response to that would be know what your limitations are.
Yeah.
Which is, if you're not in recovery yourself, you can still be effective, you can be welcoming and helpful, but do not pretend that you understand what they're doing with the language of oh, well, all of us are addicted to something. That may be true, but not in the way that it is for people with serious substance abuse issues, right? People who work out too much or who work too often, workaholics, they typically are not in trouble with the police. They're not stealing from family members to cover that up, to deal with that problem. It is not the same. And if you try to present it as it is, you're going to lose all credibility with the person you're trying to help, and they're never going to listen to anything that you say. Would you agree?
No, I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, sometimes I wish I had a GoPro camera in my office, to the shock when one of us will come to see me and start down a road, and it's the skill sets, right? Like, we know each other. Like, we know each other. We may not know that you're an alcoholic, but we sense it, and we speak it directly, like you talked about in the accountability. And when I will look at somebody and say, that is such a lie. I've done that before, but I have that. We have that because of our experience to do that. And to this other thing, we talked about this a little bit yesterday. You and I were talking after our Sunday afternoon naps. The language of clergy, right? What you said, 12% of people in seminaries, right? I'm surprised it's that high, honestly. But we were talking about this yesterday in terms of being open and receptive. First of all, like Kevin said, we have 4 meetings, 2 Al-Anon, which, by the way, is a critical part of this whole story. If y'all don't know what Al-Anon is, it's the support group for that family, like Christine, who, the disease affects our entire family, not just the alcoholic. But I had 0 training in seminary about alcoholism. None. Not even hardly a mention of it, perhaps, which is really a shame when you think about it. And I just lost where I was going with this. But even though I wasn't as connected to the church as Kevin was, I had been steeped in my faith tradition my whole life. But I was trying so hard to live up to other people's expectations of being this perfect firstborn son, right, my entire life. And if someone had spoken to me in religious language when I walked down those stairs into that smoke-filled basement over in Brunswick underneath the Presbyterian Church, by the way, if someone had spoke to me in the language that we use in church, I would have run out the door. It's not helpful all the time, and it's hard sometimes to communicate that. But
yeah, we rely. I mean, what faith tradition teaches us, right? Well, you say your prayers.
That's right.
You go to church. You trust in Jesus or God. Right. I don't know if we're all Christian here or not. Trust in God. That's not helpful advice to offer somebody who has come to you in need. Because guess what? I've done that my whole life. And the implication is you're just not doing it well enough.
Just not good enough.
If you would try a little harder, if you believed a little more faithfully, then God would actually help you, or you haven't really tried.
That's right.
Those are all wonderful resources, but they're maybe not the most helpful response. The bishop who ordained Tommy, who just retired a few years ago, he and our current bishop, neither one of them is in recovery, but they know that we are.
Mm-hmm.
And they have called on us any number of times when clergy or other people are in trouble, because they know they don't have the tools to help, but they know who does. So one of the most helpful things as leaders, as faith leaders, as congregational leaders that you can do if you're not yourself in recovery is know some people who are. You've got them in your congregation, I guarantee you. Or if not, amongst your colleagues that you can call, that you can reach out to and say, look, I got this guy. He needs help. I don't know what to do. Can I give him your phone number? I guarantee you we will say yes every single time. So know what your resources are. Understand your own limitations when it comes to the help that you can offer. And also be prepared for them to cuss you out and walk out the door and accuse you of being a hypocrite.
That's right.
Because you won't give them the help that they want.
That's right.
Right?
That's right.
So those are some responses to what.
Why are you looking at that? My sponsor's ringing in my ears constantly, and he reminds me all the time, Tommy, a suitable response is often no. No, I will not give you $25 so that you can eat because I know better. No, I will not receive you back into my home, firstborn son. I love you, but you have work to do. Right? Setting those boundaries, healthy boundaries around ourselves. And as pastors, we have pastors' hearts. We want to wrap our arms around every person that comes in our door. That's our call into ministry. But when you're dealing with people like me, we are great sales, and I was a salesman. All right? We are the best at telling you what you need to hear so I get what I want, right? And so be aware. I had a gentleman, and real quick, because we got the question, and I want to ask questions of y'all too, show up literally 20 minutes before worship yesterday. And he cornered one of my sweet little old ladies in the parking lot. I don't even know if I told you this. And was trying to ask for some money, and I interceded and invited him into my office. We had a quick cup of coffee, and quickly admitted that he was struggling with drugs and alcohol. I said, well, you've wandered into the right place. How can I help you? First thing out of his mouth was, I need money. And then he began to recite the Psalms to me at nauseum, out loud for the whole church to hear in the parish hall where I was sitting, all in an attempt to gain my trust and to believe in him, right? This is what you're up against. Cunning, baffling, powerful, right?
Another good response, especially if you have meetings in your church, if they are open meetings. I don't know if we all speak the same language or not, but for 12-step meetings, some of them are open, some of them are closed. If you don't know how to find out the difference, come ask us and we'll help you. There are resources available online to find meetings near you, wherever you are, and they will describe sort of the conditions and qualities of those meetings. Anybody can go to an open meeting. You don't have to be in recovery. You don't have to want to be in recovery. You don't have to wonder, do I need to be in recovery? But if it's an open meeting and you've got somebody sitting with you that you think needs it, offer to take them. Go. Don't say, I'll meet you there. Let me take you to this meeting. There's a meeting at 8:00 tonight. I will go with you. Just walk in the door. You don't have to know what you're doing. Somebody in there will recognize right away what they're dealing with. You're going to get welcomed and received, and that you will both be well taken care of. And you can simply say, I'm Kevin and I am here to help. And they'll say, hey, Kevin, welcome. We're really glad. They really do that at meetings. For those of you who don't go, like, I didn't know that was a real thing. I just saw I was on TV. All right. You say, hey, I'm Kevin. They're like, hi, Kevin. That's stunning.
Yeah.
One of the other things that happens in meetings that, in my mind, separates them from the church is that at the beginning, somewhere in the meeting, they're going to hand out chips, right? You know, for 30 days, 60 days. What I know till I went to my first one is that they'll give you one to start out. They're called different things in different areas. And in Louisiana, where I got sober, it was called a desire chip. If you just have the desire, you want to try to stay sober for 24 hours, raise your hand. We'll bring you this chip to help you get started. And if you do it, the response will knock you dead. Just the ovation and the applause and you just know everybody in the room is behind you. And so once they do that, then again, this was the tradition there. They'll say, well, it also serves as a slip chip if you've relapsed, you know, as we call it, if you've gone out and done some more research, or if you have reestablished your sobriety date and you're coming back in and you want to start over, raise your hand and we'll give it to you for that too. And when people do, just one of the hardest things in the world to do is to come back in. But when they do, the response is exactly the same. Nobody says, how could you? Or I knew you didn't mean it. Or again, you get the exact same welcome. Somewhere in the church, man, we have lost that. We've lost the ability to see people as they are at this moment and not keep score against them, right? We don't do that in 12-step programs. The only thing we care about is that you came back, right? Doesn't matter what, you came back. And if you're back, you're welcome here. Now, that said, if you don't want to be here, we tell them recovery comes with a 100% misery back guarantee.
That's right.
You don't want it, you can have all your misery back. There's the door. We will never get between you and the door. But we'll always keep a seat for you if you ever decide to come back. Churches like to think that we work that way, but we don't. We don't. So when you want to ask, what can we do, either as leaders or as members, stop keeping score.
Be welcoming.
Just right.
Stop keeping score.
Right.
There's more in there.
There are more.
Let me have the basket.
These two are kind of connected. Given the pharmaceutical advertising of drugs, medicines, nonstop on all media, how can we counter the emphasis on sanctioned drug use? Those advertisements make me sick. They're horrific. They never tell you what the drug is or what it does, right? But boy, they push straight to consumers. It's also when direct-to-consumer pharmaceutical marketing started, that's when the price of prescription drugs skyrocketed. Those two things went hand in hand. Ask your doctor about, what is it, the purple pill? I remember the ad. Isn't that terrible?
Yeah.
I don't know what the pill is, but I remember the ad. What can we do to counter that? Absolutely nothing. You can't. It is prevalent. It is constantly there. We talk about our public policy is based on attraction rather than promotion. We don't try to sell anything. What we hope is that people see us and go, there's something different. There's something different. And it says that in one of the scripts that we use. If you want what we have and you're willing to go to any lengths to get it, we got some suggestions for you, right? That is the only counter. Is just to show them this is who we are, and you're welcome. Yeah. What role do you see that law enforcement should play in the opioid epidemic? Well, first of all, God bless you because you're on the front lines.
That's right.
I spent 10 years in Huntington, West Virginia. Y'all know about opioids in Huntington, West Virginia? It is the epicenter of the opioid epidemic in the U.S. It's part of a triangle of drugs, guns, and prostitution. There's actually a Netflix special called Heroin, which is a play on words that is spelled both with and without an E on the end. And it's about the first female captain of the Huntington Fire Department and the difference that she and the mayor, who was a member of my congregation, have made in the community's response to the opioid epidemic. And if we don't learn from our mistakes ever, but if we've tried legislating substances out of existence in this country before. It's called prohibition. You may remember it did not work particularly well. That is the birth of organized crime in America, is prohibition. We cannot deal with the epidemic of substance use disorder on the supply side. We got to have laws, I agree. Like we need them, and we certainly need those officers who are, and the first responders who like very often are the front line. But this problem only gets solved on the demand side. As long as there's a demand for anything, we will find a way to have a supply for it. So if we're going to make any progress in the war on drugs, from my perspective, it comes from dealing with the spiritual sickness, the spiritual disease that drives the demand for drugs and alcohol. We're never going to fix it on the making it illegal or sending people to jail for longer. We keep trying it. It doesn't work, right? They sell drugs from prison.
That's right. More than you realize.
Yeah.
It's terrible.
So what is the role? You probably already know it. When you run into somebody that you've got to revive with Narcan, arresting them and treating them like garbage is not going to be a helpful response. I mean, they're going to come back angry and combative and sick. They're going to throw up all over you. Treatment's the way to go, right? And sometimes here's your choice: treatment or incarceration. I just dropped somebody off at detox this morning. By the way, I'm happy to send this basket around because the detox center just called before I came up
That's
here
right.
to tell me how much I owe them for getting him in detox, and it's a lot of money. So if anybody wants to chip in, feel free. Look, you can't make anybody get sober, but the hammer that we had was that he lived in church-owned property. So he had two choices: detox, or we're changing the locks tomorrow.
Yeah.
And you get to decide whether your stuff stays your stuff and you have it outside the doors before we change the locks, or if it becomes church property after we change the locks with it still in. So he had a choice. He didn't have to go to detox. It's just the other choice was not pleasant. So he opted for detox. Is it going to work? I have no idea.
No.
He may make it a day. He may make it 6 weeks. He may stay sober. None of that is any of my business. My business was I had help that I could offer. I knew what to do. I offered the help with some consequences if they didn't. And then that's it. The outcome is not in my hand.
And how often do you and I bounce things off of each other? So Kevin and I, no kidding, we probably at least twice a day we speak on the phone with something. Because our doors do revolve around this all the time. How many times he'll ask me, Tommy, have you done exactly what you're supposed to do? Yes. Then let it go. When I was first started sponsoring people, I didn't have a great track record. You know that we've talked about this. It's sharing our experience, strength, and hope to that person in that moment, doing the very best we can to help them see what's in front of them and provide them resources, and then you let go. They're not mine to fix. And I had to, now, the hardest part of this, we won't do this because we need to make room for them to ask questions, but,
You want to do that one?
well,
Or
I was trying to, but anyway, I had to do it with my own son as a parent. I had to do what my mom did for me to my 19-year-old. Now, it's a triage story we were saving for later, but it is the hardest thing to do, again, I think, for pastors, people that are called to love and serve and heal and offer forgiveness and all of that. It's so difficult for us to detach and let them go and let them, what does Lewis tell me all the time? I pray that you feel enough pain that you'll let go and surrender.
Well,
Now that sounds harsh, doesn't it? You know what? He was right.
you know, not to embarrass you
No.
or pat myself on the back. But how long did you and he struggle with this, even after that first time, until just a few months ago?
Oh, I still pick it up. I'll still do that. Yeah.
But
I mean, you said something earlier, and I just want to stand up and cheer. I mean, that's the other misconception. There is no cure for alcoholism. Those of you who are in it know. I mean, I am a recovering alcoholic. I'm an alcoholic for life. There is no fix. I'm probably more likely to go out this afternoon and drink than I was at 6 months. Fair? Or just as likely as I was.
Yeah, I like to say at this point, I've been sober for 10 years, and the what that means is that at this moment, I am much closer to my next drink
Yeah.
than I am to my last.
Yeah. So what Kevin was alluded to, so a few months ago, I literally walked myself back into the very darkness that I had tried to escape by my own design, by trying to cling to and fix it. Remember, that's what you're talking about. And my sponsor once again said, I guess you've forgotten what pain was like. Right? It's a daily reprieve.
You want to talk about the
Well, I
third
want to
step
add,
question?
so how do you explain how step 3 works for the non-religious addict?
Does everybody know what step 3 is?
You say it out loud. It's
Made a decision to turn my will and my life over to the care of God as I understand God.
So as you understand God is the key for me in that statement, which I personally speak openly of the brilliance of Bill Wilson, because so many of us, and I'll even throw my confession earlier, was so scared that God would be ashamed of me. Right? And so Bill Wilson took that off the table at the beginning. Now, I will tell you that my understanding of grace and forgiveness and love of Jesus came from smoke-filled basement rooms, not the Episcopal Church. I saw Christ in the eyes of a bunch of people that looked not like people I would hang out with from my silver spoon upbringing, but they shared something with me that I couldn't find in books. It was powerful. It was enough to move me, and I'm hard-headed, he knows, to seek a deeper understanding of God. But it wasn't through that religious language that we talked about.
Yeah.
So this God of our understanding, it doesn't bother me as a Christian priest, right? Because I came to understand God in my own way. And there's others in recovery that will seek God and find God in other avenues. Quite frankly, I think it's beautiful.
Yeah, I don't talk about God or Jesus in meetings
No.
because they're going to take one
That's
look at
right.
me and go, "Oh yeah, I don't want what he's selling."
That's right.
But when I talk to people about the third step, you got to go back to the second step, right? There's a reason they're in the order they're in, and the second step is that we came to believe in a power greater than ourselves that could restore us to sanity. So before you get to step 3, you got to come to step 2, which is all right, I believe that there is a power greater than I am that can restore me to sanity. And for people for whom that notion of God, that language is so problematic because of its close ties to religion, my question to them is, do you not already know of a power that's greater than yourself? Because if you found your way into a 12-step room, you do know a power that's greater than you are. And for me, it was alcohol. I was very clear, right? Like, even leave all my religious upbringing out. Like, alcohol, it had my number, right? So if I'm okay with understanding that there's something greater than I am, then what I need is for there to be one that can and will restore me to sanity. And the evidence for that is just look around the room. Because if there's not one, then everybody else who's in that room, man, they're hopeless. But you're looking at people who've been sober for 20 plus years, for 30. My first sponsor's been sober for 45 years. Like, if they weren't right about that, everybody in that room would have been miserable. I can't use the word that immediately comes to mind because we are in a church.
That's right.
But they weren't.
They were happy.
They were happy.
Yeah.
Right? So clearly there is some power greater than I am that can do this. And step 3 is the one I struggle with all the time. It is a daily decision to do that. Because I forget that I'm made in God's image instead of it being the other way around. It's not that I don't think that there is a power greater than myself that can restore me to sanity. It's just that they won't. Because I am forgetful. I am sometimes careless. I I am sometimes not faithful to the promises that I make. And if I've got God created in my own image, then that means that the God of my understanding is going to be that way with me, right? So when I really struggle with step 3, that's what it comes down to. I don't know if that's helpful for whoever asked that question, but that's the approach that I take with people for whom religious language is difficult.
We've talked a lot.
Yeah, that's all the questions that were in the bag.
Yeah.
And then you and then.
Loaded question. And
Oh, I'll jump right in.
I know Kevin
while you
will.
think of the answer.
Well, I'm going to say this because Kevin and I felt that, and I struggled with it early on too because I couldn't quite. It just didn't line up for me, right? But as I got sober and I read a lot of stuff, I talk about this a lot. Is that I read a lot of Richard Rohr, where he's going to shake his head. And I've gone and listened to him lecture, and he's never confessed to being one of us, but he writes like one of us. And he professes from the stage that, in his view, the closest thing to Christ's intent for the church that exists in the world today exists in the rooms of AA, 12-step program. Why? We've touched on 2 of them already, where they welcome all. No questions asked. Simple willingness, put one foot in front of the other, and learn to repent, walk a different way of life in the community of others who forgive one another and love one another. And so, where has the church gone wrong? How much time do we have?
Yeah. So, AA, which is the first of the 12-step programs that we know of in this country that all the others grew out of. We don't speak for AA. Let me be clear about that.
That's right. Sorry.
That's the anonymous part, but it is, as an institution,
Sean, cut the
80-something
camera
years
off.
old, right? There are still folks who are active in those programs who were formed by the first people in those institutions. My first sponsor is one of them. I talked to him yesterday, right? So the church, as a human institution, is over 2,000 years old.
That's right.
Give AA 2,000 years and we'll probably have screwed it up too. But it's still early enough in its infancy that it refuses to be distracted from its primary purpose. And anything that comes up in meetings that is outside of that, there's going to be an old curmudgeon in the room who says that's not our primary purpose.
That's right.
And I think the church has gotten distracted from our primary purpose by lots of other purposes that are noble and deserve our time, but they're not our primary purpose. That's at least what I see. Like, how many clergy talk openly to their congregations about their own prayer life? We don't teach people how to pray. We're too busy talking about other things, right? We just sort of avoid, I don't know why it is, but we don't do it very often. I think the church needs to turn its attention back towards its primary purpose. That's my
No, we talk about that.
patented
I knew where you were
response.
going on.
Yeah.
That's why I looked at you, because I think you're right on.
Uh-oh. Yeah, sure. Did everybody hear the question? I talked about my wife and I living and thinking like alcoholics before I started drinking like one. That's a great question. Alcoholics are never to blame for any of our own problems. It's always somebody else's fault. We tend to be resentful. of what we do not have. We tend to think that we deserve more than we have, and we are not satisfied with what we do have. We are, oh, Lord, yes. Oh, absolutely. I mean, you go into the rooms and they kept saying resentment is the number one offender. And I'm like, why are they talking about resentment all the time? Because that's not my problem. My problem is I drink too much, and I just need to learn how not to drink too much. So can we please stop talking so much about resentment? But they wouldn't shut up, right? So finally I said, all right, well, let's assume that they're right and that my problem is resentment. What am I resentful about? Man, let me tell you what happens when you pry the door open on that dark closet and start to look and you realize, oh my God. Right? I mean, it's always, if this one thing about my life were different, then I'd be happy.
That's right.
If I had this instead of what I have, it would be so much better. That is alcoholic thinking, right? We also tend to spend way more money than we have.
That's right.
So we're constantly in debt. We're constantly making excuses for ourselves so that other people won't get mad at us. Any of this sound familiar to people in recovery? That's alcoholic thinking. That's what I meant.
Yeah, we think the IRS will go away.
Preach.
Preach. I mean, it's so true. I was delusional. I tell this story to people that will listen often. Somewhere around 6 or 7 months, I wouldn't even call myself sober at that point. I was dry, certainly. I hadn't had a drink in 6 or 7 months. But one day, the world started coming into focus in ways that I hadn't seen since probably my childhood. This sounds silly, but I told others that I thought I was going crazy. I heard birds singing. I mean, seriously, probably for the first time in 26 years. I paid attention to the sunrise in the mornings. I mean, I was becoming connected again to this beautiful life that was there. I had just shunned it for my own selfish desires and running off, and doing my own thing. And I was clouded by, they'll tell you at Willing Way Hospital, I'm a big proponent where I went through, that when we become alcoholic, our brain ceases to mature, right? Who knows that, right? So the drinking age was 18 when I was growing up. Maybe it was for you too, Kevin, but in South Carolina. And I started drinking routinely at age 16. All right, so fast forward to age 46 when big fancy Tommy Townsend ends up in a recovery house. I was probably operating at a much lower capacity than I should have been, right? I mean, it has physical, spiritual, and mental effects on our bodies. There's no denying it. I mean, no question. The heartbreak, we haven't even talked about what you do when you triage somebody and where to send them. You talk about the nightmare, even with all the knowledge that I had when my 19-year-old son came along in my footsteps, he remembers struggling to find treatment centers that would actually help him without putting him on another drug. Because they're there, because they get paid for prescribing those drugs. Talking about heartbreaking, I used to go all the time, but I don't go anymore to St. Simon's on the Sea, into the rooms in there, and they're so glazed over in whatever they put them on to detox them, they couldn't hear God if God was standing in front of them in a bright, shining light. That's a whole nother topic for another time, but finding outlets for people once you triage them is a challenge. We were shocked when you just got that call.
That's right.
Earlier about $2,000. Anyway.
Yeah, if anybody's got $2,000 in their pocket
we're taking,
that you don't need, come see me. There was a question up. Yes. Mm. Mm.
Mm. Go down.
Thank you, Joyce, for all of that. It's one of the things I wanted to make sure that we got to today is that most of the time, most of the conversations that I have about addiction and what do we do now are not with the alcoholic or the addict. It's with somebody in their family.
That's right.
Faith leaders are more likely to get the crying mother,
That's right.
wife, child, partner, frantic and at the end of their ropes in our office than we are the drunk.
That's true.
And those are the most gut-wrenching conversations that I ever have to have. Because you know this, how do we make him stop? Well, you probably can't.
That's right.
You probably can't do anything about them. Here are some steps, here are some options, here's some things that we can try, but until their own pain, until the pain of changing is less than the pain of continuing what they're doing, they're never going to change.
Those paths are so parallel, right?
So that well, just that's the thing that
Yeah.
as faith leaders, you got the people who are coming, you're not going to be able to help them. You can sit with them in their misery and be compassionate. You can offer understanding. You can make suggestions. I have in my phone a list, mostly of women in Savannah who are in Al-Anon, whose number I'm allowed to give out. That's because there's the resource. Here is somebody that you can talk to who will be far more helpful to you than I will be. But we talk about addiction as a family disease, and typically people think that means it's passed from one generation to the next. That's true. But it's also a family disease in that the effects of the disease tend to fall more harshly on the family member than on the identified patient. They're the ones who bear the consequences of our terrible decision.
That's
Yeah,
right.
that's right.
That's right.
That's right.
That's
Took
right.
another hostage.
But what's interesting, because that would be my number one, and it is my number one thing when I sit with a family member. But what has helped me is because of our experience. But those are probably, like Kevin said, the most gut-wrenching conversations that I have to have. I had remember this lady a few months ago, 86-year-old woman who had a 52-year-old son who she couldn't get off her couch. We know these stories. And she wept in my office. She just couldn't understand how she had to say no to her baby, who was 52, sleeping on her couch. Right? I mean, it's, I couldn't minister to people without Al-Anon. Is huge. Nice balance at our parish now because we try to make space for both groups, and it's lovely. It's a lifesaver.
Yep.
Yeah.
Hey, Laurie.
Hey, Lori. That's right.
That's right. Hmm. I have a Jesuit spiritual director. I'm not Roman Catholic, but he lets me hang out with him. Jesuits are very well trained in spiritual direction, and it's one of the gifts that they have to offer to the world. And Jesuits were founded by Saint Ignatius. Ignatian spirituality is very well known around the world, and if you look at the 12 steps, they are the Ignatian spiritual exercises, just written in everyday language. I mean, Bill W., we credit him with writing the 12 steps, at the kitchen of Sam Shoemaker, an Episcopal priest in New York. Well, let me tell you what, they didn't come up with those things on their own in 10 minutes. I don't care what they say. Bill Wilson had a huge ego. Those are spiritual truths that have been rooted in faith traditions for centuries, if not thousands of years. There you go. That's right. No, that's right. That's absolutely right.
Wow. How does that happen?
I think it's time to wrap up, but I wanted to thank you so much. Wow.
I appreciate the opportunity, and I'll hang out for a little bit. I don't have anywhere to be right now, but if you have questions that you didn't get to ask, or you didn't feel comfortable asking in front of a group.
And do you have our numbers in case anyone wants? You're welcome to contact us anytime. Yep. Yeah, that's right.
That's right.
In this city.
The benefit of
You will come back one of these other
Happy to.
years. We keep doing this.
Yeah.
the benefit of having all your dirty laundry aired out publicly
Yeah.
is that they no longer have anything to threaten or frighten you with.
That's right.
It's like, just bring
Amen.
it. Come on. So,
Amen.
Good.
yeah.
That's right.
Thank y'all.
Thank
I hope
you.
we can have you come back again. Before you leave, please, fill in your
There we go. Probably most appropriate after such a wonderful talk if we would join together. Most of you probably know this with the we version of the Serenity Prayer. God, grant us the serenity to accept the things we cannot change, the courage to change the things we can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Amen. Thank you.